7. Does everyone else have 7?
Yes.
All right. Not used to the TV speaking off. All right. A meeting of Planning and Economic Development Committee was held today, Tuesday, December 16th, 2025, at 7 p.m. in the Automatic Chamber, and duly noticed in 2 places, including the city's website, in accordance with the requirements of RSA 91A22. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman at Large Melbourne Moran Jr., Chairman.
Here.
Alderman at Large Ben Clemens.
Here.
Alderman Derek Tebow, Clerk, is here. Alderman Ernest Jetty.
Here.
Alderman Tyler Govia, Vice Chair.
Here.
We have 5 present. We also have, it looks like, Planning Manager Matt Sullivan.
Director Max Sullivan. And Alderman Lopez has joined us. First, before public comment, I'd just like to clarify, I did initially cancel this meeting. Today is my father's birthday, and he's deceased, and I did not plan on coming here, but Alderman Lopez thought this was very important, and here we are, and I'm glad you all were able to make it. Public comment. Anyone from the public? I see no one. Communications?
There is none.
Petitions?
None.
Unfinished business?
We have O-25-076, amending the land use code by amending the accessory dwelling unit ordinance and definition of dwelling unit accessory. I make a motion to recommend final passage.
That motion is ordered. Discussion? Alderman Lopez?
So I feel, and this is my impression, everyone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like we're now stuck in some kind of limbo where accessory dwelling units can be applied for, but the city doesn't have a way to regulate such.
Director Sullivan, could you join us just because I feel that it would be more conversational? Thank you, Alderman Lopez. Please continue.
Well, that makes sense because Director Sullivan might have a stronger legal grasp on this, but my takeaway from the last meeting is that we now don't have a way to regulate it, and there were some questions that were raised. So my original hope in pushing this forward was to create a mechanism that people could increase housing stock, but I didn't necessarily want to create an unplanned debacle, and I was getting the sense that that was how the board felt, that there wasn't enough work done on this and we needed to figure more out. We are kind of up against a wall for substantive changes this year because we can't do the public hearing within this legislative session. But if there is a better agreement or understanding of what this entails right now, we could introduce any changes that need to be done at the beginning, and this way we can kind of understand, okay, is it better to pass what we have right now, leave it alone with, I guess, the gates open, or table it and then, we'll have done a little bit of work ahead of next year, and we can kind of move even faster on any changes that need to be made.
Thank you for that. And before I call on Alderman Jetty, Director Sullivan, could you clarify for the committee what exactly in the legislation are we able to change based off of the updated state law?
Sure. For the record, Matt Sullivan, Community Development Director. So there are a few items that I mentioned during the last committee meeting where there was some liberty taken by staff during the drafting process of the initial legislation. One of which I think there might be some discussion on tonight was going above and beyond what the state statute called for when it came to accessory dwelling units within existing structures. We had talked about a 1,200 square foot rule that staff had included, that basically an ADU could be no larger than 1,200 square feet as long as it was contained within an existing structure. That's not contemplated in the statute. The statute contemplates 950 square feet. It doesn't have this allowance for 1,200 square feet in existing structures that we had proposed. Beyond that, very few liberties were taken. In fact, we did have some clarifying language that we included. The only other item I'd really mention of note is that we did allow in item 7, if you happen to look at the ordinance during your consideration this evening, we allowed for some flexibility when it came to how parking is provided for an ADU. And specifically, we allowed for the required parking to not just be provided on site, but potentially be provided at another location, provided that location was acceptable to planning staff. So that could be on a street parking space that's leased or something to that effect. Those are really the two changes that staff, I think, came up with that were included in the ordinance. Everything else is really and truly just a byproduct of what the statute is calling us to do as a requirement.
So the crux of the legislation that we can change is the square footage of existing structure and the parking flexibility.
That's correct. That's
And-
correct.
And I have one other follow-up question. I think the concern too, it could become an issue, right? This is by right, without zoning and all these other things. But one of the examples I have, and I don't know if this would be something that would be a problem or a problem down the road. I have 3 acres. I divide it, and I build a 950 square foot house. By right, I can now add on a 1,200 square foot to the existing structure. That's
So-
after it's been built?
So that's a great question. So if you build a 950 square foot home, the way that the proposed language reads, I'll just go through that very quickly, is that if it's proposed to be developed within an existing structure or a portion thereof, and no expansion of the footprint of that existing structure is proposed, the accessory dwelling unit may consist of up to 1,200 square feet. So in your example, Alderman Moran, there would be a structural expansion necessary to achieve a 1,200 square foot ADU. And it wouldn't even then be an ADU, right? Because it would be larger than the actual primary use of the structure. But it is conceivable that you could have a 2,500 square foot home, and I could choose to create a 1,200 square foot ADU within that, functionally making it a duplex as long as I didn't expand the structure. So I guess the question really is, in that scenario, is there really an objection to an ADU in some way taking the form of a duplex? I can't speak for the committee. I'm not sure there is, but that's where I think there might be some issues.
My thought was about loopholes. I'm sorry, Alderman Jettie. My thought was about loopholes. Let's say maybe you build a 1,500 square foot with a 1,200 square foot attached garage that the person is intending to turn it into an ADU to bypass a little bit of regulations, and then turn both units into VRBO, A or B and B.
And that loophole exists.
Okay.
To your point,
And I think that was a thing that came to me
Yep,
by
that's right.
members of the community. Alderman Jettie and then Alderman Clemens. I'm sorry I'm very hyperverbal today.
I did have a point to that last
Alderman Jettie, go ahead, sir.
So I take objection to your using the word loophole and you're looking at me. What is that all about?
No, it's just that the attorneys and finding loopholes are very impressed by.
Nuance. He meant nuance.
Nuance, yes.
So, when I looked at the enabling legislation, I found that, the legislature, in an effort to expand the housing stock in the state, adopted this legislation, which requires every city and town to permit ADUs. And they have to, every city and town has to permit at least one ADU per single-family housing lot. And, so we already do that. But in their proposal, they talk about if a town does nothing, the state law says that you can build an ADU in the town. If there's no ordinance in the town, they have the right to build an ADU up to 950 square feet. And the legislation says the city or town can choose a different number than 950, but it can't be any less than 750. Okay? Doesn't talk about, there's no limit on how big it can be. Okay? So we as a city, as long as we can change the number. We're not stuck with 950, as long as we don't limit it to less than 750, we'd be okay. Now, this ordinance uses the number 980, which is more than 950, but it's permitted. There's no maximum in the state law. So this ordinance adds, it raises it to 980, but it also says that if the ADU is contained within the existing structure, so that there's no expansion of the footprint and there's no change to the exterior, then the ADU can be 1,200 square feet. So when this came before the committee before, I said, well, why are we limiting it to 1,200? And I gave the example of somebody that lives in a large home, over 2,400 square feet. I looked at some houses on Concord Street. There's one house there that I looked at. It's got over 6,000 square feet of living space. And, there are other houses that are, similar in size. Now, we're trying to expand affordable housing. Now, I anticipate, or I imagine that, the person, I happen to know the person that owns this house, and the family has grown, the family's left. And so you've got a person living in this house by herself. And she doesn't want to move. She's very comfortable there. She's been living there for most of her life, raised her family there, doesn't want to move, for good reason. And, she could very easily, I think, without changing anything on the exterior of this house, divide it in two. There's 2 stories. And so let's say she wanted to make an ADU out of the top floor or the bottom floor, either one. What harm is there in letting somebody like that do that? Why limit it to 1,200 if you've got a big enough house? This house is over 6,000, as I say, so it could be an ADU of 3,000 square feet. I don't see where any harm would be caused by that, and I see a great advantage because you've got these big homes. Her alternative, I guess, is somebody could say, well, why don't you just sell it and move into a condo someplace? Who's going to buy it? A very wealthy person. Okay. And we're trying to provide more affordable housing. But if this woman could make an ADU, out of half of it, it would be an expensive ADU, I know, but it would be a lot more affordable than somebody having to buy, that big house. I just see that it would provide more housing. It would, young professionals, for example, would be able to move into a very nice house, at a cost that is affordable to them, and hopefully free up some other places in town for other people, as people buy the more expensive houses, the less expensive houses become available, theoretically. So that was my thought. So I've come up with an amendment that satisfies my concern. I also wanted to mention that the legislation also says that a municipality may require that the owner demonstrate that one of the units is his or her principal place of residence, and the municipality may establish reasonable regulations to enforce such a requirement. Now, I think we do require that,
That's correct.
but I don't know that we've adopted any regulations to help, code enforcement determine whether this is somebody's principal place of residence. There was just a case a couple of weeks ago that before the zoning board, where this guy wants to, he's got a big house, I think it's 3 stories, and he wants to establish an ADU on the first floor. And his neighbors came to the hearing and said, hey, this guy isn't living there. We haven't seen this guy. He lives in North Carolina or South Carolina or something. And the guy says, well, I'm in a business, I travel a lot, but this is my principal place of business. Now, the zoning board, they said, are you confirming that you're living there, that this is your principal place of business? He says, yes. And they said, okay, well, there's nothing we can do about that. I mean, it'd be up to code enforcement to determine. But I started thinking, how is code enforcement going to determine that this is his principal place of business?
Mm-hmm.
Does he have to live there a certain number of days out of the year? Does he have to be a voter? Does he have to have a driver's license? I'm sure that there are ways of establishing that, but I don't know that they've been codified. So that's the other question I had about whether or not, if
I'm very interested because I have a place in Washington. Now I want to learn more about primary residency. So
if we don't, if it turns out that we don't adopt this tonight and it does get postponed till next year, I think that's something that the planning department ought to consider, codifying exactly what constitutes a principal place of business so that we can enforce that. With your permission,
yeah,
I'd like
can we
to
ask
give
him?
Director Sullivan, because I see him squirming in his chair there, so I know he has something to say, so would you like
Director
to
Sullivan.
talk about that point?
How are you enforcing primary residence in the city of Nashua?
It's very challenging, and it came up recently in the context that Alderman Jetty is referring to. It's come up once every, let's say, 2 months since my time working for the city. Not always in the context of an ADU, but sometimes in different contexts of occupancy enforcement. And I would suggest that it would be nearly impossible to find an ironclad way to codify how to make that determination. We've often looked at utility billing and whose name certain utility bills are being received in, but it's very dangerous to, I don't mean dangerous physically, but it's challenging to define a number of days that an individual lives in a household and whether that's the acceptable number of days. It's challenging to require someone be a voter because that is not an indication of residency or occupancy. We know that folks live seasonally between Florida and New Hampshire and other places as well. We know that some folks are here only on weekends, but they travel for work. And so frankly, I have generally said that we should stay out of the business of doing that. Now, I believe the only way that I immediately feel comfortable is with some sort of legal affidavit or similar mechanism that's available within the file, or to potentially add supplemental language to the covenant that's recorded with the property. But beyond that, it's very difficult. It's very, very difficult to prove whether someone lives there or not. And Alderman Jay, that exact case that you mentioned, we had a conversation internally. That gentleman wasn't able to provide certain things to us, but he was able to provide other things. And so we ultimately decided that we would not raise that issue at the zoning board level. But I'm not certain how we would pursue enforcement, to be quite honest with you. I'm happy to go back to the drawing board on that if it's something the committee is interested in, but I guess my final thought is that there really is no tried and true method other than requiring the individual under, penalty of law to certify that that is their primary residence. Other than that, I don't think there's any one single thing that you can use to enforce that.
All set, Alderman Jettie? Okay. And do you want to make your amendment? Oh, go ahead.
So is this the proper time to introduce this amendment?
I think no time like the present.
Okay. So I've got copies for everybody. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. I have one. Yes, thanks, Ben. Yeah, appreciate it. I have one.
So my motion is to amend 02576 by striking 190-32 accessory dwelling units, paragraph B, subparagraph 1, subparagraph A, and replacing it with the following. So the first part is the same. If an accessory dwelling unit is proposed to be developed within an existing structure or a portion thereof, and no expansion of the footprint of that existing structure is proposed, then I strike the last clause, which says the accessory dwelling unit may consist of an area up to 1,200 square feet, and I replace it with the total living space of the accessory dwelling unit shall not exceed 1/2 of the total living space of the existing structure.
That amendment is in order. Couple questions. Did it go through Corporation Council? And it sounds like you might have seen this already, Director Sullivan.
I can't speak for Corporation Council, but I don't believe that we have a strict objection to this amendment. It's only the procedural concern that if this amendment is made,
And it's substantial.
it's substantial. But I will tell you, I don't have an objection to the content of the amendment at all.
All right.
So I just handed this to Director Sullivan.
Oh, I thought he had it ahead of
before the
time.
meeting
I'm sorry.
started, and legal has not had a chance
Okay.
to look at it.
But I only asked that because of the substantial change piece, but still, we can still move forward. So can I call on Alderman Clemmons? Are you good?
Yes.
Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I had a question in regards to a different portion of this, and then I will get to the amendment. But the section that says the granting of a building permit, and we struck out certificate of occupancy. So, and I'll just read it. It says the granting of a building permit for the accessory dwelling unit shall be contingent upon receipt of the covenant and fees. So originally, the original language of the certificate of occupancy was something that Alderman McCarthy and I had worked on back in, I don't know, 2017, the last time this was updated when we were doing the ADUs. And the purpose of that originally was to ensure that the occupancy of the unit was going to be held by one of the owners of the house. So in other words, making it owner occupied. I wonder if it makes sense to leave in the certificate of occupancy as well as the building permit. So in other words, it would say the granting of the certificate of occupancy and the building permit for the accessory dwelling unit shall be contingent upon the receipt of the covenant and fees. And I wonder if that would take care of the issue of whether or not the house is being lived in by its owner.
Director Sullivan.
This is, yeah, and I think this change may not have been explained well by me last time. This change is designed, it's not designed to change the requirement for a certificate of occupancy nor the requirement for a building permit. Both continue to be required with an ADU. What we were trying to do here is move the owner's review of the covenant and the fees to very early in the process before they even got the building permit, so that they knew before they even commenced work or invested any money exactly what conditions existed in that covenant document. And then the covenant was going, our intent was to have that covenant reviewed, signed, and all fees paid prior to them getting their building permit, so they knew as early as possible. Because what we had seen happen is we had seen some folks apply for the building permit, and they get to the end of the process and say, well, wait a second, I have concerns about covenant language. I want to talk about this with staff. And it was like, well, it's too late in a way, you know, like we've missed that chance. You've potentially invested money in something we're not comfortable with. So our only goal here was actually to move the covenant and fee process to the building permit stage, not to eliminate either the CO or the building permit. Hopefully that answers, addresses your concern on Alderman Clemens. Yeah, we don't want to change any of that.
Okay. So, all right, so continuing on with the motion in front of us. The issue that I have with this is that even if we have, like I said, the certificate of occupancy, we have a covenant, whatever, that says, you know, the person is going to live there, right? What is to prevent somebody from turning around? What is to prevent an individual, and this goes to your thing about loopholes, for an individual to create an LLC and then as an individual sell the house to the LLC?
Director Sullivan. I know what he's saying, but.
Yeah, and the answer is there's very little that can be done to prevent that.
So that's the loophole.
That's the primary loophole, yes. And
And-
we have seen that happen.
So-
Absolutely.
The issue that I have with the amendment that's before us is that if you have a 6,000 square foot house, you could potentially turn that into a duplex without any real regard for what's going on in the rest of the neighborhood.
And correct me if I'm wrong.
And that substantially can change the character of Nashua. If it's 1,200 square feet, on the other hand, not so much, because you have a little in-law apartment, whatever, on your, you know, relatively large house. If you want to do the 3,000 square feet, go through the zoning board. And so that's kind of where I'm at, because again, this is going to provide a very substantial loophole for somebody with a lot of money to be able to do that and then flip the house to an LLC or some other corporation that they in themselves own. And we could be seeing a lot of that
And
if
that-
this were to go through the way it's written.
And I was just going to point it out from our last conversation that there's still the option to go to the ZBA to get more than the 1,200 that's already in legislation. And Alderman Jettie has a perfect example, but my concern would be greed. I bet it's probably, I'm not saying that that person would sell and then what, but maybe down the road, down the street, 4 houses down, someone who's retiring sells to a developer. And I'm even more worried because I'm getting, anyone else getting emails about adding ADUs onto their properties? I mean, it
My
seems
house isn't big
predatory.
enough, probably.
Yeah, but I'm just worried about the predatory nature of it, or the business aspect of it. It's great business, too, for people getting side income, which I think is also great for people that live here. But how many times have you seen, look, Santa Barbara properly, they put very heavy restrictions on VRBOs because people are coming in, hedge funds buying up the land, the properties, and just renting them for short-term rentals. I don't know how that helps affordable housing. Alderman Jettie.
So, so when you talk about the, the person getting, the ADU and then, selling the property to an LLC.
Sure.
There has to be a covenant that is recorded at the Registry of Deeds, and that covenant says that the continued use of the accessory dwelling unit is conditioned upon compliance with all current and subsequently adopted ordinances and statutes applicable to the property, one of which is that it has to be owner-occupied. So you can't, when you talk about selling it to an LLC, and you're not the member of the LLC living there, well, you can't, that would be violating, you could no longer maintain the ADU because you're no longer in compliance with the ordinance.
Director Sullivan, and then Alderman Clem.
I'll be quick. Alderman Jettie is correct. With that said, we have had, I can think of one scenario where we were not, I'm certainly not going to name addresses, we were not certain whether someone was a member of the LLC that owned the property, and we really weren't able to confirm that easily. So we had someone representing that they were a party to the LLC, but really no confirmatory paperwork to defend that. And our question, I think, to be honest, our question was, do we take this to court on this basis? This person is saying that they're a party to the LLC. Even if they're refusing to provide paperwork, should this be a court action? And I actually think this case is still open with us right now. And I don't know that we've made a decision, but it's still challenging in that scenario, I guess is my point.
Alderman Clemens.
So what do? Make them convert it back?
Director Sullivan.
So if you spend 40 grand or 100 grand, let's say, doing this, okay, and then you're the person, you sell the property, what do we do? We make them spend another 100 grand to convert it back? Is that the law?
So the answer to that, Alderman Clemens, in the scenario I'm talking about was that duplexes were allowed by right in that zone, and this configuration was functionally a duplex. So they basically, I can't remember where we landed exactly, but they essentially had to provide or apply for a new land use permit that says we are going to have a duplex. And in a duplex scenario, there's no requirement for owner occupancy. So there was no conversion cost, but if we had been in a zone where duplexes were not allowed, they would have had to apply to the zoning board for a variance to have a duplex. If they had been successful in achieving a variance, owner occupancy would not have been required. If they had not, they would have had to resolve the fact that they had two dwelling units, one of which would have been unpermitted.
Alderman Clemens.
So what you're telling me is that the city is going to spend money litigating every time a by right ADU is created, and then someone tries to sell it to rent it out, if it's not in an area that already is allowed to have an ADU. Is that what we're saying?
Director Sullivan.
I think I'm intentionally not saying that, Alderman Clemens, meaning to say that we are constantly making decisions about whether or not litigation is the right step forward. And in cases where we think that we'd prefer to err on the side that someone is telling us the truth about their participation in an LLC, and the alternative is a substantial legal battle that could be very protracted for a period of time, sometimes we don't do enforcement on those cases. But if we were to know that there were an ADU, a primary residential unit, and we knew, and I'm not sure how, but we knew that there were no owner occupancy, I do think we would issue a notice of violation. I do think we would. Now, would we go to court for a year? I don't know that we would ultimately. I think we'd probably try to find a way to resolve the situation, but we haven't had an example that I can think of where we were absolutely sure that there was not an owner residing even temporarily in one of the units on site. It's never been that crystal clear to us, unfortunately.
Alderman Clemmons.
I just think all of this is a slippery slope.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's worth, I don't think that it's worth the debate. The state made a decision to allow ADUs. We should figure out a way to live with them in a way that is not going to substantially change the character of our neighborhoods in a detrimental way. The only way to do that is to limit the square feet of those ADUs. And I think by not putting a number in there, you're going to either have situations where companies come in, they do this, or a person comes in and they do this, and they're looking to rent out both sides of the house for whatever reason, because they know by right they can do it, and they're trying to get away with something. And we're going to create more headaches if we limit the size, and they have to go and they have to get a building permit for that size, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Even if they were to go through that step of then moving away and renting out both sides, now you have a situation that's more tenable for the neighborhood, because again, the unit size isn't as big, so you're not going to have as big of an impact on the neighborhood itself. And that's why I think that for all those reasons, that's why I could not support this amendment. I think the better option is to limit the size. If you want to do a bigger ADU, or you want to create a duplex, or whatever it is that you want to do, go to the zoning board.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Alderman Jettie.
So I appreciate the comments. I would like to point out that, by saying that, if somebody, if we adopt this and somebody wants, in the example I gave, they want to establish a larger than 1,200 square foot ADU, that they could just go to the zoning board. Well, I want to point out that, the zoning board does not, or should not, give out variances just for the asking. In order to get a variance, you have to satisfy the 5 criteria established by state law. And one of those criteria is you have to show that the law, limiting the ADU to 1,200 square feet, is causing you an unnecessary hardship. And, a lot of unnecessary hardship has been the source of a lot of controversy. The courts have interpreted it many different times, and every time they do, the legislature comes back and changes the meaning of it, and the court changes it again. It's a constant battle trying to appreciate and understand exactly what it means. But right now, the state law says that unnecessary hardship means that owing to special conditions of the property that distinguish it from other properties in the area, that there was an unnecessary hardship created by the way the zoning law is applied to this property, because there's something different about the property that is different than every other property in that zone, in that area. And the example I gave about the house on Concord Street, a whole bunch of houses on Concord Street and adjacent streets are of the size that I've described. So it's not, this person could not go to the zoning board and say, I want to create a 3,000 square foot ADU, and the law doesn't allow me to, so that's a hardship for me. You know, that doesn't satisfy the definition. And, you know, we had a case recently where our local zoning board, you know, granted a variance based on a finding of hardship, and the court said no, that they were wrong, that the hardship in this particular case, you know, that it wasn't a hardship that was different than every other property in that zone, and the court overturned it. So it's not an easy thing, and if you think that, you know, someone could be entitled to have an ADU under the right circumstances, and, you know, and we're just going to say, well, you just go to the zoning board, you know, then, you know, why do that? Why, you know, if you think that under those circumstances, an ADU of a larger than 1,200 square foot size would be appropriate, why not allow it? You know, why make that person take their chances with the zoning board? And the idea that, you know, because of the size, you know, you're already by making it 1,200. 1,200 is a pretty large living unit. You know, the house that I live in is not much larger than that. So it's a very commercially, you know, saleable item. You know, if you wanted to, you know, as you suggest, you know, get in the business of converting, you know, making ADUs out of single-family homes, and then, you know, and renting it out and changing the neighborhood. Well, you know, we have to. You know, the legislature is telling us that we have to do that. You know, it's just a question of the size that we're permitting, and I don't, you know, to say that someone will, you know, I mean, it requires that it be owner occupied, and if you say, well, someone can lie about that, or someone can say, you know, occupy it and then you know, move out and let, you know, just tenants live there, you know, you're always going to have, you know, I mean, I think we live in a climate, a political climate now, where obeying the law isn't always what people do, and you know, that's always a danger. Any law we pass, you know, people can ignore it, try to get away with it, with circumventing it. But, you know, I think the idea that, you know, we have a lot of people that are living in larger homes that are struggling right now to you know, pay their taxes, and, you know, this would allow them an opportunity to continue to live in the home that they've lived in forever, and you know, create an ADU on that property and rent it out and get some income to help them, you know, afford to stay there, and increase the housing stock, which you know, the other night when we, you know, were confronted with the problems of the homeless, the answer to homelessness is to create more housing stock, and this would be a way to help that.
Alderman Clemmons, thank you, Alderman.
So I have a couple of things. One, I would find it hard to believe that a house that is 6,000 square feet would have trouble getting a 1,200 square foot unit in it. So I'm not sure that they would need to go to the zoning board. I think where the 1,200 square foot, where somebody might need a variance, would be in a 2,500 square foot house that's equally divided between upstairs and downstairs. And they need that extra 100 feet because to put a wall up to get, or whatever, to square off the 1,200 square feet to get to the 1,200, now that's probably a legitimate argument that somebody could make and get by the zoning board, right? In other words, 1,200, in my opinion, is the right number. Now, we could argue about what number that is. Maybe it's 1,500, maybe it's 900, I don't know. But I think that's a pretty reasonable compromise. And again, the idea is not to have a duplex. The idea is to have an accessory dwelling unit. So if you have a house that's 6,000 square feet, you can carve out 1,200 of that and have a pretty reasonable accessory dwelling unit, I think. So I see more of like the issue being in smaller houses, and I think the 1,200 square feet gives enough leeway for most homes to be able to do this. And then again, if you're on that cusp in between, it's that 2,500 to 3,000 square foot house, depending on how it's shaped and depending on how it's configured, where you may run into an issue that, you know, you need to go to the zoning board for an extra 50 square feet or something along those lines. And that's where it would come into play. But the idea behind the ordinance, at least in my opinion, should be, no, we want to make sure that these are accessory units, not creating duplexes and things like that.
Director Sullivan, any comments on any of these statements?
No, I think the statements by both Alderman Clemmons and Alderman Jettie, one, I think it's clear that we have challenges doing code enforcement relative to these units, and I'm reminded of that when we're having these discussions. But two, it reminds me that even the state law and its 950 square foot prescription is somewhat arbitrary in nature. And so, you know, we think that 1,200 square feet is the number. We might learn that it's not, and then in fact,
Sam, please come and sit with us.
1,500 square feet is the appropriate measurement. But we simply, despite a lot of really good work that's been done and what Mr. Durfee and his team put together, we think that 1,200 is that number. That said, as you look towards next year's PEDC work and the amendment that was put forward tonight, if it does not survive, I don't think we have strict objection to this because we admit that we simply don't know what we're going to see when the code changes. So I've said that we don't object to this, but the 1,200 is based on some numbers and considerations, whereas this, I'm not saying, maybe perhaps Alderman Jay can speak to that. I'm not sure exactly what this is based on, but I'm not overly concerned by it either.
Do you want to add to that before I call on Alderman? Okay, Alderman Lopez.
All right, so a question to Mr. Durfee and Director Sullivan. Is it ridiculous to have a multi-room accessory dwelling unit? Because I know I usually hear of it in the context of like an in-law apartment or something along those lines, but
I think it would be ridiculous to have a 12,000 square foot room.
okay. So that would probably be why, because I mean, being until very recently, like apartment renter in Nashua, most of the apartments that I've had were in the 900 or less range. That's how big an apartment generally is. I had a larger one in Clock Tower, which was like they were trying to use space up. It was really absurd. But most of them have still been under the any larger than 1,200. I think they might be right around that. But where my motivation is increasing housing capacity. I am aware that one of the biggest issues that we have in terms of housing placements are suitable family types of apartments, like single mothers with a child is over 12, they need their own room. They don't need a lot of space, but it may be that Alderman Jettie's amendment allows for some increase of that housing stock, where I think I'd initially just assumed this would be like one bedroom or even just really a studio.
The first 2 years of my term, from the first house I owned on Dickerman Street, 950 square feet. If you include the basement, which was like partly furnished, it was 1,500. 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, and we added a bath. Plenty of space with 1,500 square feet total to live with 3 children, in my opinion. But Alderman Clemens.
And I'm going to direct this question to one of these two gentlemen here. 6,000 square feet, 7,000 square feet, there's probably not too many houses in Nashua that reach that size. I would say, what would you say the average or the median, actually let's use the median square foot of a home is in Nashua?
Mr. Murphy, off the top of your head.
Sure, 2,400 square feet.
Okay.
That is
This is half.
not a highly educated guess, but based off of things that we have seen, other applications that have come through, it might be a little under that. I mean, we were specifically talking about a detached single-family form where ADU would be an option. I think you'd be right around there,
Okay.
unless Director Sullivan feels differently.
No, I would say, I think if anything, a little less, as Mr. Durfee said, but no, I think that's fair to say. It depends on what neighborhood you're in, of course. You know, in certain wards, much smaller, but in certain wards, larger.
Okay. I have an idea, but I'll hold off for now.
If I may,
Yes.
I have a couple really quick thoughts on this amendment. So the idea, obviously, I understand why, you know, 1/2 is selected, right? Because there's clearly a principal part of the home and then the accessory part of the home, more or less, right? So 2 thoughts on that. If you have a 1,000 square foot home, the ADU would be limited to, you know, 500 square feet or under, which would mean they wouldn't be eligible to take advantage of, you know, the maximum in the ordinance, which would be, you know, 980 if that's where it lands. So they're getting, their rights have been diminished under this 50% proposal.
And they
Unless I
may,
missed something
nope,
earlier.
and they may in fact choose to expand simply to take advantage of the fact that they could build a larger ADU. Because if they expand the existing structure, they can then go up to the 900.
Right.
So it could create unintended
And they could-
structural expansion.
Expand accordingly, calculated off of that. My other thought on this is, say you have same 1,000 square foot home, you're proposing a 700 square foot ADU. Is that really the ADU, or is that the principal residence? And the remaining 300 square foot part of the home, is that now the ADU? How do we really determine which is the ADU and which is the principal structure? Is it where the owner is living? Well, that's not true, because the owner can live in the ADU and rent out a large part of the house. So just food for thought.
Alderman Clemens.
I honestly, as far as who lives where, what size is what, I don't think it matters. I think the ADU is
As long as it's up to
second-
code.
It's second to the, it's secondary to the point of the, or the intent of the law, which the intent of the law is to create a secondary residence, if you will, within the, who lives where. That shouldn't matter to the city. It shouldn't matter to the, and if it does, we should write that into the code that it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and right now, we don't have that stipulation that the owner has to live in either or. It has to be owner occupied, it doesn't
Right.
matter which one.
Right.
And on another thought of that same 1,000 square foot home, you know, if they're only allowed 500 square feet, well, I guess it splits either way, because say the owner wants to establish an ADU, but the owner only wants 300 square feet. So maybe he's carving off a part of his home, existing structure, of 300 square foot for himself, and now that's the ADU. It's the opposite side of the coin of, well, maybe the owner wants 700 square feet, but he carves off, you know, the 300, but say he's in the 700 square foot part that's the ADU, that's a new area that's receives the building permit, the development really occurs in that 700 square foot part of the house. But in reality, again, because if we're looking at the principal being the larger of the balance, you know, the 300 becomes the ADU. I think you can look at it either way, but I don't think we would want to run into a scenario where there's confusion around, okay, it has to be, half of the structure, because I don't think we're going to find scenarios where the principal and the accessory are very close to that 50% line. I think there is going to be a 70-30 sort of split or somewhere around there. And I think you could always just say that the smaller portion is the ADU. And there really would be no way to regulate or identify that otherwise.
Alderman Jettie?
Yeah, so I guess I'm surprised by your confusion. The ordinance itself says, an accessory dwelling unit shall be clearly incidental and subordinate in extent, use, and purpose to the primary structure. So,
Yeah.
you can't say, oh, the larger unit's going to be the ADU. No, it's whatever unit is is subordinate and incidental to the other. That's the ADU. And the owner can choose to live in the ADU.
I agree. So again, maybe we need to be not looking at this 1,000 square foot scenario. We look at a 3,000 square foot scenario where this 1,200 square foot threshold would make a real difference. So, or no, it has to be less. It has to be like 2,000. But again, you have a larger piece and a smaller piece that one of them will be up to 1,200 square feet and the other would not. It doesn't really matter which part of the house we call the ADU, because one of them is going to have to be under 1,200 square feet. Whether it is a house that is more than 1,200 square feet or less than 1,200 square feet, I don't see a way you can actually violate it otherwise. If the 1,200 square foot, I'm trying to look
Is it
at
more
the-
semantics?
I think so, because I'm looking at the 1,200 square foot threshold versus the 50%. I think you could always meet the 1,200 without the 50%. I'm struggling to articulate it clearly.
Alderman Jettie, and then I have Alderman Govea and Alderman Clemmons.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to accomplish is when you have a house that is large enough to be divided, where there's plenty of room to create an ADU, a subsidiary unit, one that's less than the other side, the other part of the principal unit. And when you've got a house that's big enough, I don't understand why we would limit it to 1,200. Like the example I gave before you came here, I looked at some houses on Concord Street. One of them had total living space of over 6,000 square feet. Okay? And the house next to it is similarly large. And there are several houses, on adjacent streets to Concord Street that are large like that. And you know the dimensions of the houses better than I do. But I can think of a lot of large houses in Nashville that are, single-family homes, where, what I'm trying to help is increasing the housing stock. And I'm thinking of people who, have been living in this big house, since they first got married, or maybe the parents owned the house, but now their families have left, they're alone, and they're having trouble paying the taxes on that large house. And this is an opportunity to allow that person to continue staying in that house that they've grew up in, lived there their whole lives, and and be able to afford to stay there because of the income they could generate from this ADU. Plus, the ADU in these that I'm envisioning in these large homes, would be a very attractive place for a young professional couple, for example, to move into. you know, at much less cost than having to buy this house, you know, they could just, you know, rent an ADU in a very nice neighborhood and a very nice house. I'm just seeing it as a, you know, a win, and I understand, you know, Alderman Clemmons is fair about it deteriorating the neighborhood, but the fact that it's no increased footprint, no exterior change, you know, it looks the same. The only way that you know that there's an ADU in there is if you go in and, you know, and discover it. But from the exterior, it just looks like a single-family home, like it always has. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to, you know, the 1,200, I think, you know, this may sound silly to say this, but, you know, it seems to discriminate against, you know, people who are lucky enough to be living in larger homes, you know, who could, you know, accommodate, you know, families, you know, in those larger homes. But, you know, and the fact that, you know, most of these houses are two-story houses, it's easy to divide them up and down, you know, as opposed to carving out, you know, a 1,200 square foot area, you know, which is doable, I understand, but it's, you know, it would require a lot more expense. So I'm just trying to help the housing situation.
Manager Durfee, if you want to
I'm
respond.
not trying to destroy the town, but the
not at all.
ADUs are here, and the ADUs are required, and, you know, a 1,200-foot ADU, you know, if it's a 2,000 square foot ADU or a 3,000 square foot ADU, I don't think it's going to be any more attractive to these scofflaws you're talking about.
Might have a good compromise.
So,
Let's hear the compromise first, actually. Alderman Gouveia waved off. Alderman Clemmons?
Yeah, so we could do, now you could tell me if we can't do this, because maybe we can't do this under the law, but my suggestion would be that we do up to, if your house is up to 3,600 square feet, you can do a maximum of 1,200 square feet for an ADU. Or if it's over 3,600 square feet, you can do a max of 1/3 of the total square footage, which would then, for example, on a, get out my trusty calculator, on a 6,000 square foot home, that'd be 2,000 square foot ADU. On a 7,000 square foot home, that'd be 2,333 square feet. On a 4,000 square foot home, that'd be 1,333 square feet that you could do. So basically, it's the 1,200 rule up to a house that's 3,600 square feet. If you're over 3,600 square feet, you can do 1/3 of the house, up to 1/3 of the house. I think that from hearing what I've heard from Alderman Jettie, from Alderman Lopez, my concerns, that would be something that I could live with, because I think it addresses everybody's concerns.
I saw some back and forth facial expressions between the two of you. What are your thoughts?
Sure. So I can appreciate what you're saying, Alderman Clemmons. Like a kind of a scaling accessory measurement. In Alderman Jettie, I have no qualms about increasing the size. I think as I articulated to you in an email, we kind of threw the 1,200 threshold, the cap, if you will, out as an initial compromise, understanding that we anticipated to see pushback for anything larger. And one of the other reasons that I did not articulate in that email is, right, ADUs are accessory. By increasing the size, we're talking more about duplexes by right, where you have two larger units, whereas one may be larger than the other, but 1,200 square feet and higher. I think many of us, if not all of us, have at some point lived in something smaller than 1,200 square feet that may have been in not the only unit in the building. And so I guess the more of the perception of the concern about perception around, increasing this beyond 1,200 square feet could be perceived as kind of a universal duplex ordinance where effectively duplexes would be allowed everywhere because that size is so high. That's obviously not what we're calling it, but effectively you create these accessory units that are so large in size that you could have effectively a duplex in a way. Obviously you can't split ownership, but that's a separate issue.
Alderman Clemmons?
Yeah, I mean, you'd have it, so to your point though, any house that's 2,400 square feet, as the ordinance was written, would be a duplex, right? So, and anything under that would be one size bigger than the other. So that's why I'm saying, like, I think maybe by doing it, because 3,600, if you have a 1,200 foot or 1,200 square foot space, that's 1/3, and then you carry that 1/3 up if you're above that.
Is there a cap potentially?
No, you would just, the cap would be the square footage of the house, only allowing 1/3 of that house to have that, ADU. And I think it accomplishes, in my opinion, it's a compromise that accomplishes hopefully what I've heard from the committee, that, we want to be able to have these larger areas in some of the larger houses, but it doesn't exactly, it won't turn it into a duplex if you're over that amount. It won't. It'll be 1/3. But it does also allow for a larger area, and that's relative to the size of the house. So I don't know what the committee thinks, but that's what I would think would be good legislation next term.
Alderman Govea?
Yeah, and my whole point was exactly how Alderman Clemmons finished up his statement here is, I think that's a good compromise, but I'm looking logistically at this piece of legislation, and if we were to do an amendment, there's no way we'd get this done before next week.
Right.
It would be my opinion, either we let this just die on the table, or do what I thought we should do at the last meeting, which was just pass it outright and then have the next committee come in and probably do that. I think that's a very solid compromise at how we could get somewhere. But
Are you coming back as chair, Alderman Clemmons?
I have not spoken to Alderman Wilshire about any of that.
Okay. But Alderman Lopez not part of the committee, but it could be carried over. Either way, whether it's by right now to 950, so it's still happening if someone wants to do it. It's just, are we going to bring it up to the 1,200 until adjustments are made next term? Alderman Clemmons?
So my opinion would be to bring this, have this go back to the Board of Aldermen the way it originally was, because in my point, right, 1,200 square feet is better than whatever the state law, what's the state law, 900?
950.
950, and then we can adjust this next year. So at least, I don't know or we can just let it die, but I think we should try to do something rather than nothing. Because there's still gonna be public hearings and whatnot we have to do.
And is it the position of the city administration who has to do this enforcement to have this as it is now versus just the state RSA?
Yes, based on our study of past variance applications,
Mm-hmm.
we see a trend in a specific direction, and this is kind of tailored to respond to that.
Alderman Govea.
thank you. Yeah, I think we pass as is and then it's revisited. I think that's the best option. It's still giving a better, I still think this piece of legislation is better passed than not passed. And even if it is for a short amount of time as a new board comes into play, I still feel it's legislation that should be passed this term.
Right. The motion is for the Jetty Amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
What's the,
It's for the Jetty Amendment.
Oh, I called it the Jetty Amendment again. It's your amendment we're voting on.
right, so You're voting on the
The amendment.
amendment as is.
No one else has changed
I
it.
heard a bunch of
presented, yeah.
people say aye.
We got to do the amendment first.
I'm not sure that,
Yeah, I feel like you guys want to not vote aye because that's changing. it.
Correct.
Oh, I see. Oh, all right, let's do this. How about, will the clerk please call the roll? Let's make it easier.
Alderman at Large Melbourne Moran Jr.
No.
Alderman at Large Ben Clemens.
No.
Alderman Derek Tebow votes yes. Alderman Ernest Jettie.
yes.
Alderman Tyler Govea.
No.
Dies.
The noes have it. Now, the original motion for final passage. Any further discussion on that motion? And just in case, will the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman at Large Melbourne Moran Jr.
Yes.
Alderman at Large Ben Clemens.
Yes.
Alderman Derek Tebow votes no. Alderman Ernest Jettie.
Yes.
Alderman Tyler Govea.
Yes.
The
4 to 1.
The ayes have it. All right, new business resolutions,
None.
new business ordinances,
None.
tabled in committee. I think we can keep that there. That will definitely die here. General discussion. I have something. Oh, go ahead. Yes.
I know I'm not a member of the committee. May I just make a quick comment?
Yes.
I think in light of the conversation this evening, it may be worthwhile for the next iteration of the PEDC to have sort of a work session around this legislation in either January, February, or March of next year. I also think in light of what we heard on the unrelated households, a piece of legislation where we got some really clear feedback from the committee, it might be worthwhile to actually work through a draft of that before we resubmit the legislation. So I know it's a bit unusual to maybe do sort of a work session outside of the land use code effort, but I think with, again, both ADU and the unrelated household legislation, it would make sense to do that here. So perhaps we can come to the next committee chair and make that proposal and have some discussion later in the winter.
Awesome, great. All right, as this is my last chairing of PEDC, and its general discussion as related to legislation that has come to this committee, and I still hold all their legislative immunity. At some point, we had adjusted legislation for the Elm Street development, and at another point, myself and the clerk weren't present, but there apparently may have been a meeting that was held that was not non-public, and the meeting minutes, the way I read them, showed that there was a particular developer almost, I felt like, bribing the Board of Aldermen, almost asking, I'll do almost anything but give you more affordable housing. And the purchase price was very, very close to a price that was almost exactly what Director Cummings had estimated for rehabilitating the Keefe. It just feels very odd to me that we would have our RFP process dedicated and telling people who have bid who are no longer involved that they had the option to have a committee determine if they were going to get that project. Then it was going to go by also going to the public, and we kind of reneged on that. I think we violated the law, but I'm not a lawyer or anything like that. I think it all should be done over and have those other people have the fair opportunity to bid again. Because there was a small business that really could have also had a great opportunity, and they were dismissed, and we screwed up the process. You can't tell someone who bids on a project, this is the way it's going to go, and then change it halfway through the game. And then you can't have another one who has a ton of money to change things up because politics got in the way, because we want to do a certain thing certain ways. So those minutes are public. The exact purchase price was redacted. I believe that should be released because I don't think it was a legal meeting. But I think LMG is going to screw us over, the city. And don't be short-sighted on the next board, I hope. All right. Public comment. No. Aldermanic comments? Alderman Lopez.
Two things. On Sunday, we have the longest night vigil. It's at 6 p.m. Here in front of City Hall. And then additionally, people might have noticed the bin outside the mayor's office, and there's a couple located downtown. Those are collecting Christmas decorations for the Delaney's house. It's a home that helps veterans find housing. We could definitely use some more. We're a little bit behind. So if anyone has extra Christmas decorations, wants to donate gift cards, anything to make it a little bit like more festive, people who are coming into Nashua and are veterans and served our country, the whole purpose is to make them feel a little more welcome for the holidays.
Anyone else? All right, I have one last thing. To my clerk, did you roll your eyes when I said my dad, I was going to cancel this meeting because my dad's,
I did not.
yeah, I'm going to check that video, because if you
Okay.
did,
Anybody
it's a
see-
really shitty thing.
Anybody see me roll my eyes?
My wife did, and she doesn't lie to me.
Okay, well, if I didn't roll my eyes, it wasn't for that.
You're a real piece of shit. Alderman Gove.
I mean, come on,
Move to adjourn.
come on,
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
come on.
We're adjourned.
That was uncalled.